calling all change makers, passion seizers, and people just crazy enough to think they can change the world. A new era for community builders is here. Meet Disciple, the perfect community platform for your passion, people, and purpose. Display your unique brand on every device with your brand colors, your logo, and customizable layouts. Connect with others and share what you're most passionate about with posts, polls, live streams, events, videos, blogs, photos, and private folders to store your content. Power up engagement with private messaging, scheduled content, unlimited reach, push notifications, and unlimited groups. Create an income from doing what you love with paid for content and subscriptions. Your community is in safe hands with data privacy, zero algorithms, and data analytics. We'll support with your growth every step of the way through our customer community, The Collective. Get access to expert live streams, mentorship, community building resources, and connect with other community leaders. Get all these benefits and more with a Disciple-powered community platform. Because sometimes you have to create what you want to be a part of. Join our movement of leaders, experts, and change makers today. Disciple. We take your community as seriously as you do.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another incredible session where we're talking about an expert live stream. Today, I have got with us Kelly Schott, who is just the wizard of all wizards, and she'll be talking about how to hire the perfect community manager for you. So she'll be sharing all her sort of golden nuggets, all her tips and tricks, and the things that you maybe haven't thought of ever in the past. So as a quick reminder, we will be doing a giveaway today, as per usual. So make sure that you ask us a question live in the chat to be in for a chance to win a strategic one-to-one session with Kelly herself. I'm going to hand over the floor to Kelly. Welcome. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Nicolette. It's lovely to see everybody today, or I guess listen to and speak with everybody today. I'm going to get right into things and introduce myself as we get going. But hi. As mentioned, my name is Kelly Schott, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about how you're hiring your first community manager. So the goal here is, as we get going, to really look at the different pieces that come into play when we're talking about hiring for a community team, building out the job description, interviewing those people, and then actually getting those people hired. But before we get into things, I do want to introduce myself fully and actually say hello so you know who is talking with you today. I am currently the community manager at Pragmatic Institute, and where I work with our community of practice of our training alumni. So they're all product professionals in different spaces, but within working with product in some way. I have spent the past 6+ years in community management with, before that, a background in journalism and community. So I've been in this space for a little while, learning a lot of different things from a lot of different people. And I'm really interested in those big picture questions of why do people do the things they do, as well as the details of that make those things happen. So a lot of what we talk about today is going to be formulated around that, are those big picture, how do we actually get this into movement, and then the details of how do you actually build that up. I'm also currently located in New York City, so if anybody in the East Coast of the US or anybody in the tri-state general, hello to everybody. But now, we're going to talk a little bit more about what exactly you want to be hearing today. You are here to talk about, and that's hiring for community. So first things first, you have decided you want to hire somebody for community. That's where we're going to start from, that really general conversation. And that first question that comes with that tends to be, why should you hire for a community role? You may be asked this question, or you may be defending this question. You may already have an answer, or you may be trying to figure that out yourself. Wherever you stand, there's a really clear, I wouldn't say answer or solution, but a really clear pathway forward. And that is that you need investment in community to see results. So you've probably heard this a lot if you've spoken in different community circles or listened to community conversations or been to events and webinars. But really, you need to invest in your community to see the results you need to prove it successful, but to also build out a strong program. I've included some research on the slide here, and this all comes from the Community Roundtable's State of Community Management report, and this is from the 2020 report. So if you Google search that or go on the Community Roundtable's website, you should find this accessible to dig in more deeply. But one of the things I really want to talk about is that advanced communities create generative value. And in this case, advanced means that they have a documented, operationable, and measurable strategy, which includes a dedicated community manager. So that means you are showing that you are investing in your community in order to see that you have support in order to then see the growth. So taking a step back, take that step forward, we need to invest. And that means creating and finding a space for a community team, because that dedicated community management is shown to connect to the business outcomes, to ROI that our people, our organizations, our executives want to see and show that value. So you can use volunteers, you can use part-time folks, but then community isn't getting full attention. If you think of somebody whose job is to do 8 other things and you're adding a 9th thing onto their plate, something is going to fall off the plate. And you don't want that to be community, but also a lot of the jobs that they're already doing are also quite important. So it is really that dedicated role that's really important to being able to create the value you need to show why community is essential to your organization. Especially if you're launching, this is something where you would need at least one dedicated person working on building out the program. At launch, there are a lot of pieces coming into play. You're going to be working cross-functionally, and there's a lot of elements that come into this, including a lot of different roles. So having at least one person in there is really instrumental to success. But also throughout, and to be able to create growth further on, you need at least that person to be able to be that foundational element of the team. So with that sole attention, you can then build out a really strong program. Kind of go back to those business outcome elements here in the really small little picture, which is also included from that report, so you can dig in more. I just want to include some quick examples of what communities have been able to tie their participation, their engagement, their actions to business outcomes. And that can look like communication efficiency, brand awareness, retention and loyalty, lower support costs. This is internal communities as well as external communities, so employee and customer facing. So really, again, showing investment and really building out your program is key to being able to get to this value. And growth can really only be sustained for so long without proper leadership and management. So again, if you're thinking about tasking someone who has several jobs already with another full-time job, what do you think is going to fall here? To see more growth, to be able to sustain this investment, you need to invest in the team. So investing up front will be able to grow down the line, and you can continue to support the program, build out the program, including a team, because you're building from a strong foundation. So it's a lot of the word growth, it's a lot of the word investment up front, but that's really what this is investing in your community with someone who will truly lead it from the forefront. And so now that you've had this argument, or you've defended your stance and you've got the okay, or maybe your executives are really already on board and you already know what you're building, now it's up to you to build a job description. This might seem like a really easy thing, but it also might not seem like an easy thing. And it can be easy. I wouldn't say easy, but it can be easier. It can be difficult. First things first, though, you really need to understand who it is that you're looking for. Who is your ideal hire? So the definition is really important before you start designing this job description. You don't want to go in and start piecemealing things together and realizing this isn't quite the role you're looking for. So really start by identifying the gaps you're looking to hire for. So if your first things first, this is your very first hire, you may have a lot of gaps, and that's okay. That's quite expected at the very first hire. But it's really then prioritizing what it is you're looking to find someone to fill. So if you can't do something, or someone on the team doesn't have the time or to learn skills or prioritize tasks, hire for that. Look for someone who can be that person. But also look for someone who complements you, the team, whatever you're looking to build out. And don't hire them just because they work like you or what you expect. Community is really great because there's people with vast amounts of backgrounds and experience levels, and you can find someone who fits what you're looking for if you're really open to listening to what they're coming in with and how they work. So just to make it a little more specific, the example here is a past role that I had. I worked with my manager really closely, especially the last few years before I took on her role and she left the company, but we balanced each other really, really well. Because we worked closely, we took on kind of separate but really balanced roles, where she was really great at asking the big picture questions. The how does this happen, or why does this happen, or how do we start this conversation? And I was really good at coming in with the details and filling out the planning and being able to see how all the dots connected. So we balance each other really, really well in that regard. And that's something where you might not work the same, but you need someone who balances out the different areas, the skill sets, the strengths that you are looking to fill out in your team. Again, if it's your first hire, you want someone who can really work cross-functionally, who does the work that they need to do, but be able to complement anybody else they'll be working with, whether that's you or another team member. Another thing you can think about if you're thinking about gaps is also focusing on particular areas. So if you're asking for everyone to do everything, it's just not going to be possible. It's really impossible to take on every single task under the sun. They can try, but something is again going to fall off their plate. Something's not going to get done or get done well. And you want to set someone up for success. So don't cast too wide of a net from the very start. We've, I'm sure, all seen job descriptions where there are enough tasks on them to be about 4 different jobs just in one. And you're trying to figure out how do you have time in the day to do all of them. So don't do that. Make sure when you're looking at the different tasks you're asking someone to do on your job description that you are really understanding the areas that you're asking them to focus in and that they're manageable. So maybe take an area of focus, like maybe engagement or moderation or operations, and really focus around that. In that same vein, you might need someone who's more of a generalist, especially if it's your first hire. You might be looking for someone who does a little bit of everything, and that's really great. That's where a lot of people start. That's a great start for a team. You have somebody who can really get the foundation built out, can build out a strategy, can build out engagement plans. But just make sure the tasks are manageable. Again, you want to create that room for success, and you want to make sure they have a path for success, and don't make it too difficult for them to understand what they own and what will be expected of them when they get into the role. And that also kind of means defining it up front. You don't need to come in on job description and say you're responsible for X number of posts and X number of engagement, et cetera, but having defined KPIs or goals or just ideas of what you're looking for can be really helpful for allowing people to know what will be expected of them. So an example here is that if you were saying they're expected to manage the forums per se and engage in the community, tell them what is expected and say, you'll be responsible for hitting our number of unique contributors or an active member rate. If you have ideas, if not, talk about, we're going to be building out our metrics in this space and you'll be expected to help build us out in these metrics, and these are our business goals. Being able to start giving that information out, you don't have to give everything out right away. Obviously, there is a bit of understanding how much you want to share up front, but giving an understanding of how they'll be measured and what success looks like is really important. Also, don't be afraid to use examples. There's a lot of research. There are a lot of different examples out in the space in terms of different job descriptions, job openings. So look and see what's out there. See how people are talking about different roles, how they're explaining different tasks, how they even just title or the verbiage they use. That's really helpful in being able to take for your own inspiration. I would say don't copy paste. That can be not so helpful. But being able to see how other people talk about things can be a really helpful way of understanding how you might want to frame or structure something. And again, we're talking about who is our hire, and there are a few different areas that we want to make sure that we mention. There are a couple core pieces that when you're thinking about community that are really key and core to the work they're doing, one of which is tools. Do they have to be proficient in anything in particular? If you're hiring somebody, what are the tools will they be using internally and externally? Do you have a platform? Are you using social media? Do they need to be really technically savvy? Do you use any internal communication tools? That also goes in line with who will they be working with and how will they be communicating? Are they going to be mostly asynchronous? Will you be on regular calls with one another? How are they talking with community members? What relationships will be important to make and build? Are they global? Are you in a particular industry? These are really, it might seem like a lot, but it comes across in the sentences you use or the explanations you use. And just saying we are a global space working with this group of people, you answer a couple of questions right there. So just make sure you're giving in these kind of core pieces of information, as well as, I would hope, the obvious, the tasks they will be managing. That can seem very obvious, but make sure you're talking about those core can't drop, can't miss tasks that this role will be a part of or be in charge of. But also thinking about mentioning if they're expected to take full ownership of something. When will that be? Will they have to own a certain project very soon after hire? Is this something where maybe over time they're going to be expected to build new systems out or new processes, or are they more maintaining what's going on? Make sure it's just understood ahead of time, again, what will be expected of this person. This is really important. So again, when they know what success will look like, they can also turn around and ask you what you would like to see during the interview process. So I'm gonna get to that in a little bit. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but again, these are really kind of the ideal pieces you really want to be mentioning in some form on that job description. Last thing in the job description area, and this kind of gets into skills and different focus areas, and I'm not going to read everything on the screen here because it's just mostly examples. Because if you're really looking at prioritizing who you want in a role and what role this person would be taking, there are some examples of what you might see and how they could break down that really emphasize that there are differences. And again, making sure you're not giving someone who you expect to be doing one thing roles enough for 4 people. So what I mean by that is if you're looking for someone who maybe focuses more on strategy, you're building out your first strategy, you want that community to be really strong strategically from the start, you want to be looking at someone who has experience building roadmaps or business plans or building out community strategies if you see that. If someone's going to be focusing on engagement, you might see contributions, forums, things like that, webinars such as these. On the technical side, you have tool maintenance, so et cetera, making sure that the tasks underneath the focus areas that you're talking about match up. Because if you're mixing and matching and saying you're going to be responsible for this, and we're going to hire another role down the line that will be responsible for this and this, you want to make sure there's differentiation. You want to make sure that people know what they're supposed to be doing and what will be expected of them. In the same vein, you're really looking at experience levels as well. So if you were thinking about hiring someone at a director level from the start, you want someone who maybe a senior manager, someone on an upper level who can really build out this team, build out this community plan. You're going to be looking for someone who has some experience. Maybe they have experience they can share about strategic thinking or really business-minded decisions. If you're looking for someone who's more entry level, you'd have someone who's maybe a little less experienced, who's newer community or comes from a different space entirely, but has some really great experience. So again, make sure you're aligning what you're asking for with also the experience level that you're providing. And we'll get to the offer in a bit down the line, but that title can be really important in one, getting people to apply to your role, but also making sure it aligns with expectations. If a director comes in and says, I expect this, and your role is saying you're asking for these things, and vice versa, entry-level role asking for director-level tasks, it's a bit of a mismatch. And we want to make sure that it's clear internally as well as externally what we're asking for. And so just some key takeaways, I know it's a lot of information up front with this, is really define exactly what the role is going to be responsible for, define what success looks like, and be specific and be clear. So again, that clear and specificity, I'm going to be mentioning that a lot, so you're going to hear that a lot, but really know internally and externally, what is this role? When you talk about it, you want your team, your organization to know what you're asking for, so then you can talk to future prospective job applicants what exactly the role is about as well. So some key resources. I know we can kind of share this afterward, and I have definitely links that you can contact me as well if you don't catch these right away, but some resources I think can be helpful. And again, you can find a lot on Google. This is just scratching the surface. But the Community Roundtable, who did that State of Community Management report, put together a 30 job descriptions piece of content that has some really great references for different job descriptions within the community space. It's really helpful inspiration, and you can find that at the Job Index. Tiffany Oda, who is a thought leader in the space, especially under community operations, put together a really great conversation, really great piece around a community operations focused job description. And Community Club, which is a space for community folks as well, has a job board, which is a really great place for inspiration for job descriptions. If you're looking for getting understanding what people are hiring for, how they're talking about things, take a look there as well. Okay, so your job description is out there. You are getting clients, or getting candidates. You are ready to talk to people. You are now understanding, what are you going to say? You're trying to figure out what exactly is the conversation going to be? What's going to be valuable to you? That comes in, again, we're going to look at the big picture, then get into the details as I like to think about this, but really comes with reviewing your interview process first and foremost. You want to know what's going to happen in what order. So again, be specific and clear. You can communicate that. Be strategic. Make sure you know how many rounds of interviews the person's going to go through, who they're going to talk to, and why and when. So if they're talking to you, if they're talking to a hiring manager, if they're talking to a VP, if they're talking to whomever, make sure you know when they're going to talk to them, why they're talking to them, and how they're going to discuss with them. Will you give them an assignment, or do they have to submit any materials? How will they introduce themselves initially? Are they going to be mostly going through a recruiting team? Is it going to be going through you? Is it going through HR? What is that looking like? Make sure you're aware so you can communicate, you know what's happening. If you're involved in this process, you want to be able to make sure everyone else understands what's going on just as well as you do. But also do your homework. When people submit this job application, they're submitting a lot of great information about them, so read it. I think it's kind of funny when you go into an interview and people clearly didn't read material you've given to them when they ask you questions and seem surprised about something. Read it. If they give you a cover letter, read it. If they give you their LinkedIn or their social media, take a look at anything they've shared with you so you have that information, that background going in. You don't need to retcon all of your questions for an interview process just because or in form of one person's information, but make sure you're adding that in if it's relevant. If maybe they say they have a really great background in one specific space, so maybe they have a lot of extensive background with nonprofit organization and you work in maybe a support community you're working with, you can ask them, how do you see that comparing? How do you see that contrasting? What do you see the biggest challenge being? Being able to tailor it slightly to their experience can be really helpful in getting to more valuable answers, but also getting to a space where they feel like you're paying attention and you're investing in them. We'll go back to that investment bingo word. But make sure that you're actually getting information that's helpful for you to understand how they'll fit in with your community. And again, community or communicate. I say it again, community is about communication. So make sure you're being clear, again, all the way through this process. Be crystal clear. Make sure that they know what the next step is, respond in a timely fashion, things that are very simple, but they go a long way if you do them. We all, I will say again, I'll use the general all, know what it's like to be ghosted, especially in the job interviewing process. And it's not fun. So don't do that to them. Make sure they're aware. And again, your control over this might differ depending on who's running this process. But as your human being, as under your influence, do what you can to make sure you're communicating. But also let them know what the timeline is when you speak to them or as you're speaking to them. Make sure they're really clear on understanding what exactly they should be expecting and when, if you can give as much as you can give, obviously. So community skills. This is where we get into more of the details. And this is something I find kind of fun because community comes from a lot of different spaces, or people come from a lot of spaces to community. There's a vast difference and variation in backgrounds and skill sets people have. And it's really, really fun to be able to dig into that and see what are people strong in? How do they translate to that community work? How do we translate all of this skill set into the tasks we need to complete? And some of my favorite questions, and again, I'm not going to read through all of these, but some of my favorite questions are really asking those, tell me about a time when. Have an example when this happened. Let's do a hypothetical situation. Those are really great exercises in being able to see skill sets that maybe are a little bit more difficult to really pinpoint. And by that, I mean, if someone says, how are you with Excel? You can kind of say on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable you feel with Excel. You can probably say how many years you've been working with it, to what degree. But if someone were to say, how empathetic are you? Or talk to me about your empathy levels, that's kind of difficult to really quantify. So getting at the questions behind those are really helpful ways in understanding how people communicate with other people. So areas like collaboration, that's a really big part of community, both internally as well as externally. When you're working cross-functionally, when you're working with different members, tell me about a time you need to work with people in your organization. Really, really simple, but you can tailor that to mean a lot of different things. How do you resolve an issue members have? What is a big challenge you've faced recently? Getting at those one-time specific questions, but also those conversations where they can talk about how they approach something, how they think through something, and how they solved it. So you see their thinking process, you also see their skill set in those areas. If we're thinking about then the overarching skill sets, where maybe we're looking at business skills, we want to bring someone in who can really talk about business outcomes, can talk about value, can build out strategy under strategic skills. One of my favorite questions I've been asked at a job interview was someone said, okay, I'm, the executive, you got an elevator with me, pitch me on community. Like, what does community mean to you? And it was a total hypothetical, off the top of the head, kind of, how would you respond to this? And it was I really enjoyed that. I think it's a really great way to understand how someone thinks about community when, one, they might not be expecting that kind of question, but it's a really great thing to see how they are on their toes and how they think about this. Also, again, tell me about a strategic initiative you had a part in and its impact, its value, talking more to those examples. And my last thing I'll kind of talk on here too is soft skills. As you can see, I crossed it out. I don't like the term soft skills. I saw someone frame it as power skills, and I would rather kind of think about like that, because I think especially in community, these skills are really, really valuable. These people skills, how do you work with other human beings is really, really important in community work, especially. So I had a question where someone asked me once, tell me about a really fulfilling moment in your community work. And I, again, love that question because I think it gets to the heart of what people enjoy about community. Again, how they think about what they're doing, what excites them, what makes them tick. It really gets to that inner level of how they think about the work they're doing. So just some examples, but I really think there are some really fun ways to get at these skill set questions. So it's not just like, you've experience with this and this, but tell me more about this. You see a little bit more about their experience and what they enjoy doing. And so key takeaways here, again, define your overall process and your timeline. You want people to know what they're expecting internally and externally. Adapt questions to your applicant if you can, as much as you can. Make sure there's something in there that's personal, and communicate. Again, be clear, be specific. Last up here in resources, before we get to the job offer, is something that I've used quite a lot. And I keep mentioning the Community Roundtable, but they have some really great resources in this area of conversation. And this is in particular the Community Skills Framework, which goes right back to what we were just talking about in terms of overarching skill sets and finding those more task level conversations or tactical level conversations you can have around larger skill sets. So I will say I've used this as a professional development tool, being able to measure my own growth or my own skill sets. But I've also used this quite a bit when interviewing to say, I want someone who's going to be focusing on engagement skills. What are some tactics that I can kind of pull from to ask them about or to put together my job description as a whole? So this is really helpful for really building out and connecting those skills to actions or tasks or tactics. And lastly, you want to create a compelling job offer. So we're now at the place where we have put out our job description, we have interviewed candidates, and we found someone who's the one. We want to offer them this role. What comes next? This is where you may or may not have a lot of control of this. This may be very defined by your organization, by HR. So I'm really focusing on what you can influence, what you can control or communicate in general. So I absolutely recognize you might not have a lot to do with a lot of these pieces, but you can advocate, you can share, you can communicate with both sides of this to talk through these kind of conversations. So number one is salary. That is something that usually comes up quite early. And when you're advocating for a role is a part of the conversation. So my really big point here is make it competitive. You want to make sure, again, your salary aligns with that initial role definition that you put together and that you understand who you're asking for, what you're asking for them to do, and what that compensation then should be or that person deserves for doing it. If you're asking for a director level role, that salary is probably going to look much higher than if you're asking for maybe an entry level role. And it should benchmark against these industry usuals or the industry research. It should look at different roles across community roles, or should look at different roles across your same industry. So the same idea of use case, of industry, of community, do your research. A lot of this is out there, and it can be looking at different roles and seeing what they're offering. It can be looking at community research. There's a lot of great community research out there that looks at benchmarking and compensation. But a big part of this is just make sure you're advocating for a salary that makes sense for the role you're asking for. So create that healthy benchmark. You don't want someone to come in and be that perfect candidate, but then when you get to the end of the conversation, they can't accept the salary role. Again, part of this is communicating early and often. If you don't have to put it on the job description, make sure you're talking about it so people understand what it is they're coming in for. Again, HR, recruiting might take care of a lot of this kind of conversation, but if you can, make sure you're advocating. I put up a number here, again, really cursory research, but someone for under the community manager title could median make around 75 to 88,000 US dollars. And again, use this to inform your research. This does not break down by industry. It's not breaking down by use case. Really take a look and dive in deeper, but this is a good kind of general starting place for what you might be looking for. That then leads into my next point. There's a general lack of role standardization across the community space. So what community manager as a title means to you might mean something very different to someone in a different organization. So again, with that salary conversation, it's not as easy as it sounds to directly compare titles. So you're really looking at the tasks that you're looking for them to do. But it also means the title might look different in your own organization for what you're asking of someone. You might say, someone else's community manager doesn't make sense to you because that would look like a senior community manager to you, and that's okay. You really want to go back again to what you're asking them to do and define the role based on what it means to your organization. Again, you might not have a lot of control over this. You might have a general structure that you need to follow where certain roles have to have certain titling, and that's okay. Obviously, you have to do what you have to do. But also don't be afraid to sort of strike new ground and say, this is the title we really want to build out because it fits and matches the role we're asking for. That's honestly how movement in this space is made, when people kind of strike out and say, this is actually more fitting of my role and I want this person to have this title, and this is the title we're going to give them, even if it doesn't quite match what you've seen so far. But again, use others for inspiration. If you see a title that really strikes you of what you're asking for your person to do, take that and tweak it and say, this is really close. Let me build this out together. If you have control over this, use it to how you have to use it, but also use it as you can to make it make sense for who you're asking for. Benefits. Benefits, again, you probably have very little control over. This is probably the least amount of control you may have over any of these pieces, but they're really necessary. And the key piece I'm going to talk about here is really communicating it. It obviously can depend on HR and your organization, what you offer, but really think about it before you offer someone the role. So make sure you're really clear with them what you can be offering, what you are offering way ahead of time. So again, you don't get to the signing stage and then find out that they need something that you're not providing. Think about where they're located is a really kind of helpful way to start that. And will they need something in particular because of that? So if they're in the US or an area that needs healthcare, make sure healthcare coverage is a conversation point. That can be a make or break deal for a lot of people. Not everyone can offer it and not everyone might need it, but it can be make or break for a lot of applicants. So that's a big part of conversation. Make sure if there are specific country holidays that they'll need to be taking, working days or hours based on where they're located, based on any piece about their demographic. These conversations should come up to make sure that they can and have access to these things that they might need. Are they going to be remote? Are they expected to come in the office? Is there going to be a commuting coverage of any kind? Again, conversations that should happen early so they know what they can expect and say, okay, I'm going into this signing already knowing what I'm basically going to be offered. So I have an understanding nothing's going to surprise me when I get there. And lastly, the future. The future is kind of hard to really define at this stage, but the conversation here is really, is there growth? Is there room for growth at this organization? And sometimes it's hard to know right away. Sometimes you don't have a clear career path, especially in terms of community, but make that clear from the get-go. Say, this is our first role and we're expecting to XYZ. We're expecting to build out a team in the near future. We're expecting to add one role. We're expecting it to stay this way. We're expecting to merge with another part of the organization. Just be honest what's possible. So again, people coming in who say, I want to be able to lead a team in the near future don't have the rug ripped out from underneath them if they find out later that that was never even in the cards. Things change, especially right now, the way of the world and economics. It's in a place where maybe it shifted from what you would have said early, but again, be clear and communicate that. from early stages. When you understand what their expectations are, then they can kind of align that with what you expect, and you'll be both in a nice, happy, balanced state. Part of this is also just setting time and goals to review them later on. So if you come in saying, we want to hire you, what are your goals? Let's make sure this conversation bleeds into our onboarding and bleeds into our actual conversations. So we can say, again, we know what you expect of us. Let's put this into place. So key takeaways in this last bit here: do your research. Again, there's a lot out there. Community is a growing space, especially over the last several years. There's been a lot more research and content. So do your research, look out there. There's a lot of room to Google and Bing and Yahoo, whatever you may do, out to find the information you need. Be honest, be clear, and really work with your new hire to define expectations. You want this to be collaborative. You want them to be happy. This is a big part of the conversation. Again, community is collaborative, so think of that from the very, very start. And the last key resources before I get into our big wrap up, again, the community roundtable. This is a big part of those 30 key job descriptions, but it was a community careers and compensation research from 2020, which has a really great breakdown of compensation, of experience, of job descriptions. Again, this is pre-pandemic, so it's a little bit not as recent in terms of numbers, but it's a great starting place. As a good benchmark for understanding, especially experience levels broken down by role. And the community club, again, also has a salary repository, which is really helpful, kind of inspiration or just understanding of context in terms of titling and roles. There's not a whole lot of extra context within these roles. So if you marry all the different research that exists out there together, you can kind of help find the different pieces you may need in here. So, do you think you're ready to hire someone for your community team? This is the big question we're kind of wrapping up to the end with. And I hope the answer is either a resounding yes or no, because we need to do X, Y, Z, and you know exactly what those next steps might be. Just to kind of wrap it all together, whether you feel like you're ready to go out and kind of tackle this, or maybe you're thinking more about the pieces or the questions that have now come up, is one, be intentional and be strategic all the way through the process. Define your role, your interviews, your offer based on that ideal hire, and work with them and your team to make sure that they're a great fit and that they feel that way too. So you want your person that you're talking to feel a heck yes about this role, and you want your entire team to feel heck yes about them joining your team. Do your homework, research, Google, find inspiration in others. Use what you can find to inform your job descriptions, your interview questions, your offer details, anything like that, to really give you that knowledge, that education to come in with great questions, with a great job description, and with something to offer. And don't be afraid to ask for guidance. Conversations like this one, communities like the community club, the CR network from the community roundtable, CMX, those are all great places, and as well as the collective in itself, to ask your peers for advice or to workshop with you. So we're all constantly learning and improving together in this space. And so don't really be afraid to say, I have this, can someone read it or see if it makes sense, or what sort of advice do you have here? Communicate always. I, again, cannot stress enough how important it is to be clear and communicate early and often to everyone in the process. You want your potential hire to know what is expected of them and what they can expect. And you want everyone involved internally to know what is expected of them and what they can expect. So communication just helps everyone feel more satisfied with the entire process and just happy with the whole situation. You don't want someone internally being frustrated with this whole process and it inadvertently bleeding into the candidate joining the team, and vice versa. You don't want someone to really come in and feel frustrated with the process and not tailor how they answer to your job description. And lastly, really be patient. It can take a little bit of time to find that person. There are and continue to be a bevy of roles out there, especially right now. There's a lot of layoffs happening and change happening in different spaces. People are shifting. Roles are opening up in certain areas. They're kind of falling in other areas, and there's a lot of movement. And so there's only so many people, though, for all these different types of roles. And because people are moving so much, it might take some time to find your fit. It might take a little bit of adjusting and fine tuning for your job description to be exactly right to get the people you're looking for. It might take some fine tuning of your interview questions to really get at the answers you're looking for. Maybe you're not quite hearing what you need to hear. It really can take a little bit of editing and updating to get you there. And that's okay. As long as you're learning and adapting from what you're seeing, there really is no failure. There really is no kind of issue or major challenge here. Unless you're way, way off and you're seeing absolutely no one that you're anywhere close to accepting, then you may really need to take a look at what you're asking for and make sure it really is aligned, because something's not quite right there. So take your time. It will get there. You might need to be a little bit of patient. Have a little bit of patience, be a little patient to get that final person. And so I know there were some kind of questions in the chat, and I'm going to say thank you before I get there. So I'm not going to run away from your questions, but thank you. And put up just some of my contact info. If you want to connect or ask questions offline, I'm always happy to say hello. My LinkedIn is right on the screen here as well. So happy to connect. You can send me an email, whatever folks you wrote, and I'm happy to talk more on this topic. But I'm also happy to answer any questions that I know people have thrown in the chat, or any questions people may have. And so I know I saw one that was about sort of community manager work behind the scenes that I think was really interesting, because I think you're absolutely right, where that some people do a lot of work that's not quite under their own name, or communities are not always open to outsiders. So you have a private community, and therefore it can be quite difficult for candidates to present what they've done. So it can be difficult to really talk about their past work. What can you do to overcome that? And I think that's a really great question, because I've also worked most of my time in private communities. So there isn't a lot you can share in terms of clips or in terms of examples. If someone says, can you, give me a link to something, you kind of say, no, I really can't. So there is limitation to that. And you have to kind of be able to understand that a little bit. And one, as the interviewer or the hirer, understand what they're coming in with, but just sort of tailor what you're asking for. When I was looking for jobs in this same situation, I was able to anonymize a lot of things, even just in terms of stories. You take names out, you can even change little details in terms of screenshots or different kind of, sometimes you may have to share an example document of some kind. Asking to be able to anonymize something can be a really helpful way to be able to share that out. There are some things where maybe you just really can't share certain information. I know there are communities that work in healthcare and elements like that, where even just legally you are not able to talk about or share certain information. And that has to just be a part of the conversation. And that's where you can get more into maybe some of the hypotheticals to get at those questions and say, maybe you don't have an example, but talk to me about how you might approach this. So there might be just some shifting there, but having them talk about that and understanding the limits they may have based on that level. There are some ways to get around that, but there are also some ways that you don't want to breach that conversation as well. I hope that helped.
Hey, Kelly, very much for sharing all those tidbits. Honestly, like all the tick, I'm not even hiring right now, but I need shots in hand. So thank you. But one that I thought I could run you through. So the first one was to know what metrics you would use to measure community managers' success.
That's a great question. So one of my favorite answers, I think, for community is that it depends. That's my answer for almost anything community related, is that it depends. So what metrics would you use to measure community managed success really looks at those metrics you're starting from the very beginning. So the it depends comes in of what is the role they're trying, or you're trying to get them to fill. So an example here might be, again, if you're managing, I'm looking back at a past role I'm thinking about that I hired for, was a fellowship, and it was kind of a little above an internship level role. And so that was not quite, it was kind of entry level, but it was a little bit more full-time than a part-time person. It wasn't quite an intern. And so a lot of success there was their own learning, their own comfortability to taking on different actions or tasks or responsibilities is the word I was looking for, being able to complete certain projects and say, are you able to take on these processes? And then being able to say, what are we building from that? So what is our sort of overarching journey, and how are we hitting the goals and metrics to get us there? Now, if you're looking past that and you're getting maybe a community manager, you might be saying, we want to have this active member rate, And so you need to maintain this number or grow this number, whatever this looks like. Maybe we're looking at hitting a certain amount of webinars with certain attendance. And so being able to really sit there and find those exact numbers aligned with the responsibilities you're asking them to do. And then be able to talk with them as well about what are they looking to learn? How are they looking to grow? And say, what is your key point in this role? Like, what do you want to be building? Are you someone who wants to build out a new program? Then that would be a big marker of success if you hit that. Are you someone who wants to really work on launching a training program? Being able to add in their conversations as well. But a lot of times those metrics depend.
That makes complete sense. Next question. How many moderators would you suggest?
So that's a great question. I'll just put in and say it depends. Not quite, but there are a lot of people ask for that. Is there a standard number of moderators per community managers? And I haven't seen anything that's tried and true numbers. I think it really does depend on your community, your conversations that are happening. What does moderation look like in your community? So are you really are using moderation on your platform and it's very kind of automated mixed with actual people coming in? Or is it a fully manual process? Is it something where you are expecting people to really come in, read through discussions, read through conversations, moderate and be a part of it? Then you'd want to have more in that case. But I would say definitely if you want to have a number, it's really hard to put that to. I think it really does definitely go into what are you able to pull together from your tool. I'm a big proponent of automating as much as possible in a way that makes sense. So don't just automate for automation's sake, but try to scale your work is a better way of explaining it. So don't just hire one person for 20,000 people, but don't hire 200 people for 20,000 people unless you can. The conversation that really comes in is what are you expecting them to do? And that's kind of a non-answer, unfortunately. But it kind of comes in line with what exactly are you trying to get done and how many people are needed.
I totally agree. I almost think that you can have like tiers to it. Things like report posts for you, for example, actual conversations or whatever it may be. So per every 1,000, you needed one person, but it's like, what are their roles to tear that up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a tiered program is really helpful in being able to do that, where you may have a lot of people on that ground level reviewing moderation cues, and then you come in and say the people who are the managers of that will deal with escalation, et cetera. So absolutely, I think there could be tiers to that depending on how many people you're dealing with, but also what kind of moderation you're working with.
Yeah, I agree. And then the final, Kelly, much of a community manager's work is sometimes not under their own name, open to outsiders. Therefore, it might be quite what they have done. Any idea on how to overcome that?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that just before too, but I think kind of wrapping that into a better conversation or more easy way to explain it is really working with the person. So if someone comes in saying, hey, I worked in a private community or maybe an internal facing community, so it's employee based, or just legally, I'm not allowed to share a lot of information out. One, understanding that as the hirer or as the interviewer and saying, okay, let's work with this, because one, it's not their fault. And there's still some really great information you can get out of that. It's just working with that a little bit. So it might be saying, let's anonymize things you've shared. If you're asking for someone to submit certain documents, allowing for anonymization, being able to even talk about hypotheticals. So if someone asks a question where you say, hey, tell me about a time when you had a member who was a challenging member or a problem within your community, being able to say, okay, how about let's hypothetically, you have a member do this thing, how would you approach it? Being able to switch that a little to make it a little bit more neutral, a little bit more anonymized can be helpful in getting around any issues you may see where I can't quite share the work that I'm doing, or maybe they don't really want to share some of the information that they have, the metrics they're working with, which is absolutely understandable. So being able to have room to anonymize that or be able to talk about it a little bit more broadly can still get to the points you need while being able to respect that, but also make sure that that person feels comfortable in sharing and they don't feel kind of bullied into sharing something that they don't really want to share or feel like they can share, if that makes sense in total.
Makes total sense. Cool. Well, I think that's it. A massive thank you to you, Kelly. Honestly, this has been absolutely loved everything that you've said, and I'm sure that we can already done it. So yeah, big thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I would thank everybody
I would thank everybody
for being
really
great question askers.
really great question.
And I'm always happy to talk more and answer questions you may have, email, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. So happy to see everybody and hope to see everybody outside.
Thanks, Kelly. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye all.
Thanks so much. Bye all.